Imagine the ultimate duo of destruction. Doomguy's unstoppable firepower and Kratos' god-slaying rage joined forces in the grim darkness of Warhammer 40K. Worlds collide, daemons tremble, and chaos itself faces a storm it's never seen before. Can anything survive when these two legends fight side by side?
The sky above the Hive City burned with an unholy orange hue, streaks of smoke twisting into jagged pillars that clawed at the heavens. Fires raged along the upper spires, melting steel and concrete alike, while the screams of the dying echoed through the streets below. Doomguy landed first, the impact sending a tremor through the cracked ground, his boots punching deep into the rubble-strewn pavement. He rose instantly, scanning the devastation around him with the practiced precision of a hunter. His weapons were ready, his reflexes primed, and though he had faced countless demons in his own universe, the sheer scale of chaos in this city pressed against him like a living thing. There was no hesitation in his movements, only the quiet, simmering rage that had always fueled him in battle. Kratos appeared beside him, the ground cracking beneath his feet as though the weight of a god pressed the earth down. The pale scars of his body caught the dim light of the burning city, the blades of chaos coiled at his sides, ready for action. His eyes, hard and cold as stone, surveyed the devastation with a practiced warrior's gaze. He had fought monsters born of the gods, titans, and horrors that defied mortal comprehension. Yet there was something about this world, a darkness deeper, more malignant, that tugged at the edges of his instincts. He sensed an unnatural malevolence woven into the air, a corruption that whispered of enemies unseen and dangers yet to manifest. For a moment, the two warriors simply regarded one another, their mutual awareness of power and purpose forming an unspoken understanding. Neither spoke, for words were unnecessary in the presence of battle. The chaos of the city was alive around them. The streets were choked with burning vehicles, twisted metal, and the corpses of those who had tried and failed to flee. From the upper tiers of the hive, figures began to move with unnatural grace and deadly intent. Chaos cultists poured from shattered buildings, their eyes glowing with unholy light, their weapons crude yet soaked in blood. They hissed and chanted in a tongue that felt older than time itself, calling to forces invisible yet palpably present, summoning something vast and terrible from the shadows. Doomguy reacted first, sprinting toward the nearest cluster of cultists. His shotgun roared, the echo of its blast mixing with the screams of the dying and the roar of collapsing structures. Limbs flew, heads were blown apart, and the ground shook as the shockwave from each discharge tore through the street. His movements were precise, fluid, and terrifying in their efficiency. Each step was a statement of purpose. He belonged in the midst of carnage, thriving within it, unbroken by the destruction that would crush lesser men. Kratos followed immediately, stepping into the fray with the blades of chaos whipping outward. The chains sang through the air, slicing through cultists before they could react. Sparks flew as metal met metal, and the fire of his rage illuminated his form in flickering bursts, a beacon of raw strength and divine fury. He moved with the grace of a predator, each motion deliberate yet devastating, a harmony of power and violence that left devastation in its wake. There was no hesitation in his strikes, no thought wasted on mercy or pause. Every motion had a purpose, every blow was final. The first wave of attackers fell quickly, but the city seemed endless in its horrors. Shadows coalesced into forms more monstrous than human. Demons birthed of the warp, their twisted bodies writhing with unnatural energy. They rose from the streets and rooftops, eyes burning with malevolent intelligence. Doomguy paused for only a moment, switching to his chainsaw, revving it with a roar that seemed to challenge the universe itself. The machine screamed as he tore through the first of the demons, blood and ichor spraying across the scorched pavement. Kratos leapt into the air, swinging the blades with a force that shattered stone, cleaving demons in two with strikes that were almost surgical in their devastation. As they fought, a rhythm began to emerge between them. Without words, without planning, they fell into an instinctive cadence, Doomguy drawing the demons' attention with relentless firepower, while Kratos struck with deadly precision, cutting through the monsters that threatened to overwhelm them. The city around them seemed to respond to their fury. Walls cracked, flames flickered higher, and the shadows of death writhed as if to test their resolve. And yet, despite the overwhelming odds, neither wavered. There was a mutual acknowledgement in their silent cooperation. They were warriors of unparalleled skill, forged in worlds defined by relentless violence, now united by circumstance in a universe equally merciless. Amidst the chaos, Doomguy caught sight of a massive war machine descending from the upper spires, its shadow dark and imposing against the fiery sky. It moved with unnatural purpose, stomping through the rubble and laying waste to anything that stood in its path. Kratos tensed beside him, sensing the magnitude of the threat, the surge of divine and mortal instinct telling him that this was no ordinary foe. Together they advanced, weapons ready, stepping over the fallen and ignoring the cries of the injured. Their focus was absolute, their fury unyielding, and in that moment the burning Hive City became their arena, a crucible in which two legends of different worlds would collide with the unrelenting horrors of the Warhammer universe. The streets trembled beneath their combined might, and the air seemed to crackle with anticipation, as if the city itself awaited the storm they were about to unleash. Every step, every breath, every strike reinforced the truth that they were not just survivors, they were forces of reckoning, embodiments of destruction in a world defined by it. The ground was littered with the remains of their foes, yet more emerged from the shadows, and Doomguy and Kratos pressed forward, unflinching, undeterred, their arrival marking the first spark of hope in a city consumed by darkness.
The first clash came swiftly, almost as if the universe itself sought to test the mettle of the two newcomers. From the shattered spires and ruined walkways above, a squad of Chaos Space Marines descended, their blackened armor adorned with twisted symbols of corruption and desecration. Each step they took shook the debris-strewn streets, their bolters thundering in unison like the heartbeat of a godless army. Doomguy and Kratos, side by side, watched them approach with the silent calculation of predators recognizing worthy prey. Doomguy's fingers tightened on the trigger of his shotgun, while Kratos flexed the chains of his blades of chaos, the chains rattling softly as if echoing the tension in the air. The Chaos Marines unleashed their first volley of bolter fire, rounds tearing through the air with a shrill, deadly hiss. Doomguy dove behind the shattered remains of a transport vehicle, his reflexes honed over countless battles against demonic forces kicking in instantly. He returned fire with brutal efficiency, pumping shells into the chest of the nearest Space Marine. The armor cracked under the sheer force, fragments flying in all directions, and the Marine collapsed, its weapon clattering against the rubble. Kratos leapt forward, his chains arcing through the air with lethal precision. The first Marine met the full fury of his blades, severing the corrupted warrior in two, the chains whipping back to strike another in a seamless, fluid motion. The ground trembled under the combined assault, and the remaining Chaos Marines adjusted their strategy, recognizing that these two were no ordinary opponents. One charged with a massive chain axe, its teeth jagged and gleaming with unholy energy. Doomguy sidestepped with a swift, cat-like motion, slamming a fist into the Marine's chest and sending it flying back into a pile of burning rubble. Kratos met another head-on, parrying the swing of a heavy power sword with his blades of chaos and twisting violently, using the momentum to hurl the Marine into a crumbling wall. Sparks flew as corrupted armor met enchanted steel, and the air was filled with the metallic tang of blood and ozone from discharged weapons. Despite their differences in combat style, an unspoken rhythm emerged between them.
Doomguy drew fire, his shotgun blazing and grenades detonating in showers of flame and shrapnel, while Kratos struck with calculated, godlike precision. Each Marine that thought to flank one of them was instantly cut down by the other. The synergy between rage and tactical aggression turned the battlefield into a chaotic ballet of death. The Chaos Marines roared in fury, their own disciplined formation crumbling under the sheer, unrelenting force of the duo. Amid the frenzy, a Daemon hound materialized from the shadows, its snarling maw dripping with green ichor, eyes glowing with a malefic light. It leapt at Doomguy, claws extended and teeth bared, aiming to tear him apart before he could reload. Doomguy reacted instinctively, revving his chainsaw as the Daemon landed. The mechanical scream of the weapon merged with the beast's own growl, and within seconds the creature was reduced to a mangled heap of fur and shadow. Kratos pivoted, sensing the arrival of two more Daemons approaching from either side. With a swift, powerful motion, his blades lashed out in wide arcs, cutting them down before they could reach their prey. Each strike was deliberate yet violent, combining raw strength and supernatural ferocity in a display that even the Chaos Marines paused to witness. The tide of the battle began to turn. Where the Chaos forces had expected fear and hesitation, they found instead an unyielding assault. Doomguy launched himself into a group of Marines, his momentum carrying him through bolter fire and slashing attacks alike. Each shell from his shotgun tore through corrupted armor, each punch fractured bones and shattered helmets. Kratos leapt from a crumbling parapet, landing amid the enemy ranks with a force that splintered stone beneath his feet. The blades of chaos moved like extensions of his own arms, cleaving through limbs and skulls with an elegance born of experience, brutality, and divine fury. Explosions from grenades and stray bolter fire caused the ground to shake violently, sending dust and debris into the air. Doomguy and Kratos adapted instantly, moving fluidly among the chaos, each understanding the other's actions without a single word. Doomguy's eyes caught the telltale glint of a plasma gun, and before it could fire, a well-aimed punch from him sent the Marine wielding it crashing into a burning wall. Kratos, sensing a shadow moving behind a pile of rubble, spun his blades in a deadly arc, severing the Marine attempting to flank them. The two of them moved like a storm, unstoppable and terrifying, a blend of raw strength and precision unmatched in this grim, dark battlefield. The surviving Chaos Marines, now visibly shaken, attempted to regroup, but it was already too late. Doomguy and Kratos pushed forward, turning the tide entirely. Smoke, fire, and the scent of blood filled the air, marking this street as their domain. The clash had revealed not just the enemy's weaknesses, but also the potential of their partnership. Though neither had spoken a word since the battle began, the tacit understanding between them was undeniable. Each move, each kill, each narrow dodge and devastating strike reinforced a partnership forged not in friendship, but in survival and mutual respect for raw, unrelenting power. Amid the ruin and carnage, the Hive City's inhabitants peered from hidden alcoves, watching in awe as the two warriors carved through impossible odds. Doomguy's relentless aggression, paired with Kratos' calculated brutality, left nothing in their path standing. The Chaos Marines, who had expected to intimidate and dominate, found themselves overmatched and outclassed. For every bolter round fired, there was a chainsaw revving, for every sword swing, a pair of blades of chaos meeting it with superior force. The battlefield itself seemed to yield to them, the laws of physics bending to the combination of two unparalleled forces of destruction. And in that moment, it became clear that their presence in this war-torn city would not go unnoticed.
The dust had barely settled when Doomguy and Kratos found themselves standing amidst the wreckage of the first engagement, the echoes of gunfire and the groans of the dying fading into a heavy, oppressive silence. The city around them smoldered, buildings twisted and blackened, while the scent of burnt metal and charred flesh hung thick in the air. Doomguy's breathing was steady but controlled, each exhale a methodical release of tension, his eyes scanning the ruined streets for any sign of movement. He had faced horrors before, demons and monsters that defied imagination, yet something about this world felt different. The malevolence here was not just in the creatures or the corrupted soldiers, but woven into the very air, the very architecture, as if the Hive City itself had been touched by a malign hand. Kratos remained still for a moment, his gaze sharp and calculating. He had seen gods fall, monsters shattered, and worlds crumble beneath his rage, yet this place tested him in a different way. It was a war of scale and strategy, not just brute force. The horrors were numerous, relentless, and cunning, but they followed patterns that could be deciphered. He turned to Doomguy, studying the man with quiet interest. There was an intensity there, a focus honed by battle that resonated with his own experience. Kratos did not speak, but the slight nod he gave was acknowledgement enough, a recognition that strength alone would not carry them through what lay ahead. The pair moved cautiously through the streets, bodies low, weapons at the ready. Ruined vehicles provided sporadic cover, but the city offered little else. Smoke curled from fires that refused to die, and distant echoes of chaos worshippers chanting sent shivers down even Kratos' spine. Doomguy's tactical mind began to take over, noting choke points, high ground, and potential ambush locations. He motioned subtly toward a partially collapsed tower, suggesting they take higher ground to survey the battlefield. Kratos understood instantly, vaulting over the rubble with inhuman ease, landing beside Doomguy with barely a sound. Together, they climbed the twisted stairwell, each step bringing a new perspective of the chaos below. From their vantage point, the scale of the assault became clear. The chaos forces were not disorganized. They moved with purpose, splitting into squads, flanking, and using the ruined city as both shield and weapon. Demons skittered and slithered through broken streets, and cultists scurried like vermin, hurling fire and improvised explosives. Kratos observed quietly, his mind piecing together patterns, identifying key targets, and predicting the enemy's next moves. Doomguy, ever the tactician in the midst of chaos, started to plot their counterattack, pointing out weak points and potential kill zones with precise, deliberate gestures. They began to form a plan, one that combined brute force with tactical precision, each compensating for the other's strengths and weaknesses. The first coordinated strike came as a test. A squad of heavily armored Chaos Marines moved along a main thoroughfare, confident in their dominance. Doomguy counted off silently, then fired the first shot, a deafening blast that tore through the nearest Marine's chest. Kratos followed immediately, launching his blades of chaos with a whirling arc that cut down another. The timing was seamless, instinctive. Doomguy drew the enemy's attention, forcing them to spread out and fire recklessly, while Kratos struck with precision, cutting through armor and bone with godlike efficiency. The enemy, unprepared for such synergy, faltered. After the skirmish, they took a brief pause, crouched behind the remnants of a crumbling wall. Doomguy wiped blood from his gauntlet, his expression unreadable but focused. "They're organized," he said quietly, his voice low, almost a growl. "This isn't just chaos. Someone is controlling them." Kratos grunted in agreement. "A strategy hides behind the madness," he replied. "Brute strength alone will not be enough. We need to think, anticipate, and strike where it hurts." The two men, so different in origin, yet so similar in experience, began to meld their approaches. Doomguy's relentless aggression complemented Kratos' calculated strikes, and Kratos' understanding of enemy psychology guided Doomguy's raw power into precise, devastating impact. As they moved deeper into the city, their respect for one another grew. Kratos began to anticipate Doomguy's instincts, predicting the paths he would take, the targets he would strike first. Doomguy, in turn, began to recognize the rhythm of Kratos' attacks, the deadly timing of the blades of chaos, and the pattern in which he cleared threats. They shared no words, only nods, gestures, and a mutual understanding that communication in this environment was better expressed through action than speech. Their reconnaissance led them to a ruined plaza where a massive demon had been summoned, its body towering over the wreckage, pulsating with dark energy. Doomguy studied it, noting its weak points, its movements, the way it shifted its weight in preparation to strike. Kratos observed the surrounding cultists, identifying which were likely to defend the creature and which were expendable distractions. Together they formulated a plan. Doomguy would draw the demon's attention, using firepower and explosive devices to keep it focused, while Kratos would maneuver into a position that allowed for a devastating strike. When the battle began, the execution was flawless. Doomguy charged forward, guns blazing, grenades detonating around the demon's feet. Kratos leapt over debris and fallen enemies, striking with lethal precision. Every movement was coordinated, every action amplified by the presence of the other. The demon lashed out, but the combination of brute force and tactical cunning proved overwhelming. The surrounding cultists were cut down with ease. Their attempts to interfere were neutralized by the perfect timing of their assault. The city itself seemed to pause in acknowledgement of their partnership. The fires burned brighter, the shadows recoiled, and even the distant roars of the Hive City's defenders felt like they were watching two forces beyond reckoning. Through this first real coordinated effort, it became clear that Doomguy and Kratos were not merely warriors thrown together by circumstance. They were a team, one capable of facing unimaginable horrors and surviving, each learning from the other's strengths, each pushing the other to a new peak of lethality and strategy.
The distant rumble of armored footsteps echoed through the ruined streets before the two warriors could even see who approached. A squad of Imperial guardsmen emerged cautiously from the shadows, their last guns raised, eyes darting between Doomguy and Kratos with suspicion and unease. They had seen horrors in their lives, the taint of chaos and the endless death of war. Yet these two figures radiated an intensity that seemed almost otherworldly. Doomguy's armor was battered but unyielding, his weapons primed and ready, and Kratos moved with the kind of lethal grace that spoke of gods and monsters. The guardsmen hesitated, unsure if these strangers were saviors, threats, or something far worse entirely. Doomguy took a slow step forward, letting the barrel of his shotgun lower slightly but not completely, his stance unthreatening yet undeniably commanding. Kratos mirrored the movement, coiling his blades of chaos with a controlled, deliberate motion, each chain link catching the dim light like liquid fire. Neither spoke, but their presence alone conveyed a message of strength and experience born from battles far beyond mortal comprehension. The guardsmen, still wary, shifted uneasily, their training warning them to stay on guard, while their instincts whispered that these two might be allies against the chaos consuming their city. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the plaza. A demon, massive and writhing with corruption, erupted from the street, its roar shaking the crumbling buildings and sending debris flying. Without hesitation, Doomguy fired, his shotgun ripping through the creature's thick, mottled hide. Kratos lunged, his blades of chaos cutting in wide arcs that splintered bone and sinew with every strike. The Imperial guardsmen froze for only a moment, then scrambled to cover and returned fire, last bolts finding the gaps in the demon's monstrous form. For the first time, all three forces, the two strangers and the human soldiers, moved as a singular unit, each aware of the other's strengths and limitations. The battle raged across the plaza, a violent symphony of gunfire, chains, and unholy roars.
Doomguy leapt into the fray, pulling grenades from his belt and tossing them with perfect accuracy, the explosions sending shockwaves that destabilized the ground beneath the demon's massive feet. Kratos moved in tandem, calculating each swing, each pivot, ensuring that his blades struck with maximum effect while avoiding collateral damage to the already fragile environment. The Imperial Guardsmen, inspired by the sheer force of the duo's assault, found courage and precision they had not felt in years of fighting. Bolter rounds and lasgun beams cut through lesser minions, clearing paths and providing crucial support. Amidst the chaos, Doomguy noticed a squad of cultists attempting to flank from the left. He barked a wordless command, leaping towards them with explosive momentum. The impact of his boots on the ground sent dust and debris flying, and with a combination of punches and shotgun blasts, the cultists were obliterated before they could even raise their weapons. Kratos anticipated another threat from above, vaulting onto a crumbling wall and swinging his blades in a deadly arc that severed a group of approaching demons. The combined efficiency of their attacks created a rhythm that even the Chaos forces struggled to counter. Once the demon had been reduced to a writhing, defeated heap, Kratos turned to the guardsmen, nodding in acknowledgement. Doomguy's gaze swept over the squad, registering their discipline and resilience. There was an unspoken agreement forming, a fragile trust built in the crucible of shared battle. The guardsmen lowered their weapons slightly, recognizing that these newcomers were not only survivors, but assets capable of turning the tide against the overwhelming forces of chaos. One of the officers stepped forward, voice steady despite the chaos around them. He said, "You have proven your worth, and if you fight with us, we might just survive this day." Kratos, still breathing heavily, studied the man briefly before nodding once, a gesture of mutual understanding. Doomguy's response was quieter, a mere tightening of his grip on his shotgun, but it conveyed the same intent. They were willing to cooperate, if only to destroy the greater threat. Together they moved through the streets, now a unified strike force. Doomguy cleared obstacles with brutal efficiency, Kratos neutralized high-priority threats, and the guardsmen provided tactical support, laying down suppression fire, covering flanks, and ensuring that nothing slipped past their combined vigilance. The urban battlefield was a maze of ruined streets, collapsed walkways, and burning vehicles, yet the synergy between the three forces turned each obstacle into an advantage. Doomguy's instincts for identifying threats and exploiting weaknesses allowed the squad to avoid ambushes and take advantageous positions. Kratos' understanding of enemy psychology and combat dynamics enabled them to predict attacks and counter with devastating precision. Even the guardsmen, trained to follow orders and operate as units, found themselves adapting to this dynamic duo, learning from their unspoken cues and the raw power they wielded. As they pressed deeper into the city, they encountered more significant threats. Heavily armored chaos warriors, demonic beasts, and cultist warbands entrenched in strategic positions. Doomguy moved like a force of nature, clearing paths and drawing enemy fire, while Kratos struck with lethal artistry, taking down heavily fortified targets that would have required squads of guardsmen to fell. The Imperial soldiers adapted to this new form of warfare, providing covering fire and strategic support while trusting the two strangers to lead the assault. The coordination was seamless, an intricate dance of brute strength, precision, and tactical ingenuity. Through this engagement, it became apparent to all present that Doomguy and Kratos were not merely mercenaries or wandering warriors. They were catalysts of change. Their arrival had transformed a desperate defense into a coordinated offensive. Their presence elevated the guardsmen from survival mode into proactive engagement. Even in a city defined by endless war, their combined might instilled hope, or at least the possibility of it, in those who had long been beaten down by the unrelenting tide of chaos. The ruined city's silence was brief, barely a moment to catch their breath before the ground beneath them began to vibrate with a low, resonant hum, a vibration that carried an otherworldly weight. Doomguy's instincts prickled. He crouched slightly, scanning the horizon, every sense on high alert. Kratos' eyes narrowed, the faint flicker of recognition crossing his gaze. Something ancient, something monstrous was coming. From the shattered avenues and collapsing buildings ahead, a massive figure began to rise, towering over the streets like a living mountain. Its skin was a writhing mass of muscle and shadow, veins glowing with corrupt energy. Horns twisted unnaturally from its head, and jagged claws scraped the ground, sending fissures through the rubble. This was no ordinary daemon. It was a greater daemon, a creature of the warp itself, and it exuded a palpable malice that set the air ablaze. Without hesitation, Doomguy activated his jump jets, launching himself toward the first of the daemon's outstretched limbs, firing his shotgun mid-air. The blast tore into the creature's flesh, eliciting a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the city. Kratos followed, leaping over rubble and debris, his blades of chaos spinning in wide, lethal arcs. The first strike severed one of the daemon's massive claws, sparks and ichor spraying across the cracked streets. The creature recoiled, swimming a massive arm in retaliation, narrowly missing Kratos, who rolled under the blow and slashed upward, cutting deep into the daemon's torso. Doomguy landed with a thud, immediately firing rounds into the exposed flesh, each shot striking with surgical precision. The greater daemon was not a mindless beast. Its attacks were deliberate, calculated, and terrifying in their speed and power. It lashed out with massive claws, slammed the ground sending shockwaves that toppled vehicles, and roared with a voice that seemed to pierce the very soul. Doomguy ducked under a swinging arm, returning fire, his shotgun blasting holes through the daemon's armor-like skin. Kratos pivoted, his movements fluid, chains lashing outward to snare the daemon's limbs, redirecting attacks and creating openings for more precise strikes. Their teamwork was instinctive, born not of practice but of necessity, each complementing the other's fighting style perfectly. As the battle raged, the daemon's sheer size made difficult confrontation difficult. It stomped through the streets, collapsing buildings and sending rubble raining down, forcing the duo to adapt constantly. Doomguy switched to his grenade launcher, lobbing explosive rounds that detonated against the daemon's torso, each blast rocking it backwards slightly, but not enough to bring it down. Kratos assessed the situation quickly, noticing the pattern of the daemon's movements, the way it lifted its massive legs before striking, the momentary hesitation before it slams. Timing became their ally. Doomguy drew the daemon's attention, forcing it to swing and strike where he could dodge, while Kratos moved into position to deliver devastating, precise attacks at the exposed areas. The streets themselves became a battlefield littered with chaos and debris. Ruined vehicles became barricades, fires erupted from overturned fuel tanks, and the air was thick with smoke, dust, and the stench of blood. Doomguy's shots rang out, each shell striking with lethal impact, while Kratos' blades cut through armor and flesh alike, a dance of violence and precision. Even as the greater daemon attempted to summon lesser minions, hurling corrupted cultists and demonic creatures into the fray, the pair adapted seamlessly. Doomguy dispatched the smaller threats with calculated efficiency, his chainsaw roaring to life and carving through anything that dared approach, while Kratos maintained focus on the greater threat, exploiting each opening with methodical precision. Hours, or perhaps minutes, the sense of time warped in the heat of battle passed with unrelenting intensity. The greater daemon began to realize that its usual tactics were failing. It struck with wild, desperate fury, swinging its massive arms, stomping with cataclysmic force and unleashing blasts of warp energy that fractured the streets. Doomguy's armor took several glancing blows, sparks flying as energy deflected against reinforced plating, but he remained undeterred, eyes fixed on the creature's movements.
Kratos' body bore deep cuts from jagged edges and clawed strikes, yet he pressed on, each motion precise, calculated, and devastatingly effective. At one point, the Daemon lashed out with a clawed foot, sending both warriors tumbling through the debris-strewn street. Doomguy rolled to his feet, grabbing a fallen support beam and using it to vault toward the creature's exposed back, firing every weapon at his disposal. Kratos seized the moment, climbing the rebel and swinging his blades in synchronized arcs, striking deep into the Daemon's side. The impact sent the creature stumbling, the ground quaking under its weight, and a chorus of unearthly screams filled the air. Despite their combined strength, the greater Daemon's resilience was remarkable. It reared up, energy crackling across its massive form, summoning fire and lightning from the very warp itself. Doomguy and Kratos had to rely not only on brute force, but on split-second tactical thinking. Doomguy maneuvered to the side, drawing the Daemon's gaze and forcing it to shift weight, while Kratos adjusted his trajectory mid-leap, chains whipping around like serpents, striking at the creature's joints and vulnerable spots. Their attacks became a deadly pattern, one exploiting every misstep, every hesitation, every vulnerability. Around them, the city continued to burn. Collapsed buildings, shattered streets, and overturned vehicles created an ever-changing battlefield that both aided and complicated their assault. The greater Daemon's roars echoed through the ruins, summoning waves of lesser Daemons that tried to overwhelm them. Yet the duo's coordination remained flawless. Doomguy moved with unstoppable aggression, clearing paths and punishing minions, while Kratos struck with surgical precision, focusing on the Daemon's core and weak points. Each time the creature tried to regain dominance, they adapted, exploiting its patterns and forcing it into defensive mistakes. Their partnership became more than mere strategy. It became instinct. Without words, without gestures, they anticipated each other's moves. Doomguy would leap into danger, drawing attacks and creating openings, while Kratos exploited those openings with divisive skill. The greater Daemon, a creature born of terror and malice, was pushed to its limits, its attacks increasingly wild, desperate, and uncoordinated, unable to cope with the seamless fusion of raw power and tactical precision that now dominated the battlefield.
The ruins of the city offered little respite, yet Doomguy and Kratos moved with an instinctive awareness that they needed to arm themselves further if they were to survive the onslaught to come. Amidst the rubble of a once grand armory, hidden beneath a collapsed spire, they discovered a vault partially intact, its doors warped but still functional. Doomguy's mechanical eye scanned the panel, fingers deftly working to override the electronic locks, sparks flying as circuits hummed with renewed life. Kratos observed silently, his senses attuned to the environment, noting every creaking beam, every unstable piece of debris that might collapse or conceal threats. Together they breached the vault, revealing a treasure trove of weaponry and relics long abandoned, each item humming with latent energy and promise of devastation. Doomguy's gaze immediately fell upon an arsenal of firearms, each more advanced than the last. Bolters, plasma rifles, and chainsaws glinted in the flickering light, their forms both familiar and alien. He tested the weight of a modified shotgun, feeling the balance in his hands, noting the recoil, the feedback of power as though the weapon were alive in his grip. Other guns lined the walls, each etched with runes and symbols of protection and destruction. He ran a finger across one particularly massive railgun, sensing the raw, destructive potential it held, imagining the devastating impact it could have against the hordes of chaos. He methodically selected a few of the most effective and practical weapons, ensuring they complemented his own brutal style of combat. Kratos, on the other hand, was drawn to a set of ancient armor pieces and mystical relics. Each piece radiated power, some imbued with protective wards, others with enhancements that seemed almost sentient. He tested the flexibility of a Warhammer forged cuirass, noting how it reinforced his already formidable resilience without restricting movement. Gauntlets and greaves etched with runic symbols seemed to hum under his touch, a faint vibration that resonated with his own strength. He examined a relic amulet, its chain cold and heavy, sensing that it could amplify his godly energy in battle. Each artifact, each piece of armor was assessed with care, not for aesthetics, but for the deadly advantage it could confer in the inevitable confrontation with the greater demon and the chaos forces that still threatened the Hive City. As they prepared, Doomguy and Kratos worked silently, instinct guiding every choice. Doomguy modified his weapons, adjusting sights, calibrating firing mechanisms, and ensuring each piece was tuned to his style of relentless aggression. He loaded magazines, checked ammunition, and tested triggers, each action precise and methodical. Kratos tested the fit of armor plates, adjusted the tension of straps, and activated the latent power in a few relics, feeling the surge of energy course through his body. Their preparations were not leisurely. Every second counted, and both understood that the battlefield outside would not wait. Once armed and armored, they moved deeper into the armory, discovering caches of explosives, grenades, and other tactical implements. Doomguy grabbed a handful of fragmentation grenades and plasma charges, weighing them in his hands, considering the most effective use for each. Kratos selected a few incendiary vials and mystical bombs, small but potent tools capable of devastating enemy formations or creating openings in fortified positions. Together they assembled a combination of weaponry and armor that magnified their already formidable abilities, transforming them from lethal warriors into nearly unstoppable forces of destruction. The armory itself seemed to respond to their presence, as if acknowledging two warriors worthy of its treasures. Panels flickered with residual energy, screens lit up showing schematics of old fortifications and defensive turrets, and some of the machinery hummed to life at their touch. Doomguy quickly recognized the opportunity and began to recalibrate a few of the turrets, enhancing their targeting systems, readying them to support their forthcoming assault. Kratos, sensing the latent energy in the machinery, activated a few of the arcane mechanisms, channeling power that could turn debris into deadly weapons or reinforce their own defenses during the next encounter. As they left the armory, weapons strapped and armor enhanced, the pair moved with a renewed sense of purpose. Doomguy's arsenal was more devastating than ever, each weapon a perfect extension of his brutal instincts, capable of annihilating both man and demon alike. Kratos' enhanced armor and relics amplified his resilience and ferocity, allowing him to strike harder, move faster, and endure blows that would fell even the strongest of mortals. Their synergy had evolved. No longer were they merely surviving, they were preparing to dominate. Outside the city remained a smoldering ruin, but Doomguy and Kratos moved with the confidence of those who had been reborn in fire. Each step, each glance at the horizon was a calculation, a preparation for the inevitable clash with the greater demon and the chaos forces that still threatened the Hive City. Their presence alone began to shift the dynamic of the battlefield. Enemies that would have charged without hesitation now hesitated, sensing that these two figures were no ordinary foes. Even the whispers of the warp seemed to recognize the amplified threat, curling through the air with a touch of unease as the duo prepared to re-enter the fray. The streets ahead were treacherous, littered with rubble, fires, and lurking enemies, but Doomguy and Kratos moved as a single, coordinated unit. Doomguy's enhanced firepower cleared paths and suppressed ambushes, while Kratos' mystical enhancements allowed him to counter attacks that would otherwise have left them vulnerable. Their combined might was no longer simply a force of survival, it was a calculated instrument of devastation, ready to cut through chaos with precision and overwhelming power. The city, scarred and burning, awaited their next strike, and the duo advanced with unflinching resolve, weapons gleaming, armor radiating strength, and minds focused entirely on the carnage to come. The air around them began to warp, the city's familiar geometry twisting and bending, as though reality itself were unraveling. Doomguy's instincts screamed danger, his hand tightening around his shotgun as he scanned the horizon. Kratos' eyes narrowed, a flicker of recognition passing through his gaze. The air was thick with psychic energy, saturated with the alien malice of the warp. Neither needed to speak.
The sense of imminent peril hung between them like a tangible weight. The streets seemed to stretch and distort, shadows elongating unnaturally, the crumbling architecture bending in impossible angles. Even the fires from the destroyed buildings flickered strangely, their flames curling sideways as if repelled by an invisible force. Kratos led the way, his steps sure and deliberate despite the instability around them. Every instinct he honed over lifetimes of fighting gods and monsters told him that the warp was a place of deception and danger, a dimension where perception was a weapon, and the mind could be undone as easily as flesh. Doomguy followed, muscles coiled, eyes darting in every direction, prepared for ambushes that could appear without warning. Their partnership, already tested in the streets of the burning Hive City, was now forced to operate in a realm where even the laws of physics were uncertain, where every corner could conceal an entity capable of ending their lives in an instant. The first wave of warp horrors appeared without warning. Shadows coalesced into grotesque shapes, forming creatures that seemed simultaneously organic and mechanical, their forms shifting and writhing as though they could not decide on a single shape. Their eyes glowed with a malignant intelligence, and their claws and appendages sliced through the distorted air with unnatural speed. Doomguy reacted instantly, firing his shotgun in controlled bursts, the blasts tearing through the ephemeral bodies of the creatures. Some dissipated into black smoke, others reformed moments later, forcing him to continuously adjust his aim and anticipate their movements. Kratos leapt forward, chains lashing in arcs that cut through solid and insubstantial matter alike, severing limbs and forms that reassembled faster than a mortal mind could comprehend. As they pressed further, the warp itself seemed to resist them. Paths that appeared open would suddenly twist, leading them in circles or collapsing into nothingness. Gravity fluctuated unpredictably, forcing them to jump, climb, and vault in ways that defied natural motion. Doomguy's training in rapid combat adaptation proved invaluable. He adjusted his tactics on the fly, using explosive ordnance to stabilize collapsing ground and create temporary cover. Kratos relied on his innate connection to power and strength, using his momentum and reflexes to navigate the shifting terrain, turning even the warp's distortions into opportunities for deadly attacks. The mental strain of the warp was nearly as dangerous as the physical threats. Whispers crawled into their minds, voices that promised glory or whispered secrets about their pasts, attempting to exploit fear, doubt, and anger. Doomguy's mind, trained through endless battles with demons, resisted the psychic intrusion with sheer willpower, focusing on the immediate physical threats rather than the insidious whispers. Kratos, no stranger to manipulation and divine trickery, closed off the thoughts that sought to turn his rage against him, channeling his focus into the rhythm of combat and the motion of his blades. Together, they became a fortress of resolve, each reinforcing the other's mental defenses through unspoken understanding and shared presence. A massive demon emerged from the twisting landscape, a creature whose very form seemed to bend the warp around it. Its limbs were impossibly long, ending in claws that shimmered between substance and void, and its eyes glowed with the hunger of countless souls. Doomguy's shotgun roared, blasting chunks of the demon's flesh into the swirling air. Yet the creature continued advancing, reforming, and adapting with terrifying intelligence. Kratos pivoted, chains whipping in a wide arc that sliced through the warped limbs, each strike precise despite the shifting space around them. The demon reared back, releasing a wave of psychic energy that threatened to overwhelm them both, distorting the air and warping the ground. Doomguy dove forward, rolling under the brunt of the attack, detonating a plasma grenade that exploded against the creature's chest, sending a shockwave that temporarily stabilized the surrounding area. Kratos leapt high, spinning his blades to strike the demon's head, carving deep gashes into its malformed flesh. The creature screeched, a sound that rattled the mind and body. Yet the two warriors pressed on, exploiting every opening, every moment of vulnerability that the warp allowed. Time itself seemed to bend,
seconds stretching into eternities and collapsing again. Yet they moved with a fluidity that defied perception, their coordination seamless in a world where reality refused to remain constant. Throughout the encounter, Doomguy and Kratos adapted continuously, learning the patterns of both the creatures and the warp itself. Doomguy used explosive ordnance to manipulate space, creating temporary safe zones amid shifting ground, while Kratos' blades acted as extensions of his awareness, cutting through forms before they could fully manifest. The synergy between them grew with every strike, every dodge, every calculated assault. They were no longer simply reacting, they were anticipating, predicting, and shaping the battlefield, even as the battlefield refused to stay fixed. Warp-touched demons of lesser size began to swarm from the edges of perception, attempting to flank or distract them. Doomguy moved like a whirlwind, mowing down waves of these lesser creatures with rapid bursts of fire, while Kratos struck with lethal efficiency, clearing paths and preventing encirclement. Each action was calculated, yet instinctive. The combination of raw aggression and godly precision transformed the chaos of the warp into a controlled series of engagements. Their partnership, tested through every conceivable form of violence, had evolved into an almost symbiotic understanding, each move reinforcing the other's effectiveness in a dimension designed to destroy sanity. Even as the warp itself twisted and threatened to engulf them, the two warriors pressed onward. Doomguy's eyes burned with determination, his movements precise and devastating, each attack punctuated by explosive force. Kratos' blades sang through the air, each strike a deadly promise of pain and retribution, his body moving with divine power and mortal precision intertwined. Together, they carved a path through the nightmarish dimension. The very fabric of the warp seemed to bend around their combined will, shaping the horrors around them into challenges they could meet, fight, and overcome.
The heart of the warp unfolded before them like a living nightmare, a landscape of impossible geometry and swirling colors that burned the eyes and twisted the mind. Doomguy's instincts screamed danger, his muscles coiled, every sense sharpened to a razor's edge. The air itself hummed with power, thick and suffocating, each breath tasting of fire and iron. Kratos advanced beside him, the blades of chaos coiled at his sides, his eyes narrowed and body tense. This was no ordinary battlefield. The very essence of this place sought to corrupt and destroy, to warp perception and fracture resolve. Yet both warriors pressed forward, each step measured, each movement deliberate, their focus absolute. From the shadows of this twisted realm, the Chaos Lord emerged. Its form was colossal, towering above them, with limbs like jagged spires, wings of shadow and flame extending outward, and eyes that glowed with a malevolent intelligence that seemed to pierce through flesh and soul alike. Armor etched with runes of desecration glimmered along its body, pulsating with the chaotic energies of the warp, and in its hand it wielded a massive weapon that seemed to merge the properties of blade and cannon. The sheer presence of the creature radiated dominance and power, a living testament to the corruption of the warp and the ruthless will of chaos itself. Doomguy reacted instantly, leaping forward and opening fire, the roar of his shotgun cutting through the oppressive atmosphere. Bolts tore through the armor of the Chaos Lord, sparks and fragments erupting with each hit. Yet the creature barely flinched. It swung its weapon in a wide arc, the movement creating a shock wave that threw rubble and energy in all directions. Doomguy rolled through the debris, narrowly avoiding dismemberment, then fired again, his movements precise despite the overwhelming force bearing down on him. Kratos lunged simultaneously, his blades of chaos whipping through the air, cutting through corrupted limbs and armored plating alike. Each strike forced the Chaos Lord to adjust, to react, but it was clear that the entity had anticipated resistance and adapted quickly to every assault. The battlefield shifted with each blow. Sections of the warp cracked and flared, revealing glimpses of countless screaming faces trapped within the swirling chaos. Doomguy and Kratos had to navigate both physical and psychic hazards. Every movement required absolute precision and split-second timing.
Doomguy drew fire strategically, provoking the Chaos Lord to swing or fire in predictable patterns, while Kratos capitalized on the openings created, striking deep into the creature's armored joints and exposed areas. Their synergy, honed through countless battles and now tested in the most extreme crucible imaginable, was now pushed to its absolute limit. The Chaos Lord roared, unleashing a wave of warp energy that distorted the air, throwing both warriors back. Doomguy slammed into a shard of warped stone, but immediately rose, revving his chainsaw as he charged forward. Kratos had recovered mid-leap, spinning his blades to intercept a massive claw strike that could have ended most mortals instantly. The sound of metal and energy colliding filled the air, a cacophony that seemed almost musical in its rhythm of violence. The Chaos Lord's attacks became more erratic, its swings wilder, but its intelligence remained terrifyingly sharp, anticipating and countering most maneuvers. Doomguy exploited a momentary lapse, rolling beneath the Chaos Lord's sweeping leg and firing a series of explosive rounds into its side, the blast sending it staggering but not downed. Kratos used the opening immediately, vaulting over debris and striking from above, his blades embedding deep into the creature's shoulders. The Chaos Lord howled, an unholy sound that shook the very warp around them. Yet it adapted, its movements becoming faster, more unpredictable. Doomguy adjusted his trajectory, leaping onto a floating shard of warped terrain and raining fire down from above, while Kratos swung with measured precision, using momentum to tear at joints, wings, and exposed armor. The fight was as much mental as it was physical. The Chaos Lord used the warp to project illusions, to create duplicates and distortions meant to confuse and disorient. Doomguy's training against hordes of demons allowed him to ignore the illusions, focusing on tangible threats, and Kratos' experience with gods and monsters gave him the same clarity of mind. Together, they identified real from fake, striking with deadly efficiency, turning the Chaos Lord's manipulations against itself. Every counter, every dodge, every attack was a testament to their experience, their instinct, and their unspoken coordination. As the battle intensified, the warp itself seemed to react. Sections of the ground split open, revealing voids of screaming energy and swirling darkness. Tentacle-like manifestations of the Chaos Lord lashed out from all angles. Doomguy fired continuously, each shot precise, while Kratos moved with lethal fluidity, striking from unexpected angles and leveraging the terrain to amplify his attacks. Their assault became a relentless cycle. Doomguy draws attention, Kratos exploits openings, the Chaos Lord retaliates, and they adapt instantly, never yielding an inch. Amid the chaos, the duo discovered vulnerabilities in the Chaos Lord's defenses. Its armor, though nearly indestructible, had gaps where the warp energy converged, points where the raw power it wielded left it exposed. Doomguy focused on these areas with precise fire, using explosives to destabilize protective wards, while Kratos targeted them with his blades, cutting through reinforced plating and tearing at corrupted flesh beneath. Each successful strike elicited a roar of frustration and pain from the Chaos Lord, evidence that even such a formidable being could be hurt when faced with perfect coordination and unyielding force.
The battlefield had grown even more chaotic as the remnants of the Hive City's defenses fell into disarray, the streets littered with debris, smoke, and the moans of the dying. Doomguy and Kratos advanced cautiously, their senses stretched taut, every nerve alert to the slightest movement. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal and ozone, the cries of distant civilians and the wails of Daemons mingling in a discordant symphony. Doomguy's boots struck the shattered pavement with deliberate force, echoing like drumbeats across the ruins, while Kratos' chains rattled softly, the sound a subtle prelude to the violence that would follow. Each was acutely aware of the other's presence, the silent rhythm of coordination and understanding guiding every step through the treacherous streets. They moved into a wide plaza that had once been a bustling market, now reduced to twisted steel and charred stone. From the far end, a host of Chaos Space Marines advanced, their blackened armor etched with unholy runes, weapons glowing with energy as if fed directly from the warp. Doomguy crouched, analyzing the formation, calculating the trajectory of bolter fire and the optimal points to strike. Kratos mirrored his assessment, eyes scanning for structural weaknesses, vantage points, and potential hazards that could be exploited in the upcoming clash. Without a word, the plan was already forming in their minds, a combination of brute force and strategic precision, honed by the countless battles that had defined their paths to this moment. The first volley of fire erupted before they could even signal. Bolter rounds tore through the air with deadly accuracy, some striking the ruined pillars nearby, sending fragments flying. Doomguy rolled behind cover, returning fire with a controlled spray from his shotgun, each blast tearing into corrupted armor with pinpoint accuracy. Kratos leapt over debris, chains lashing in wide arcs that cleaved through approaching space marines, their heads and limbs falling with calculated brutality. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, blood, and scorched metal as the battle intensified, every movement of the duo designed to control the chaos around them. A heavy Chaos Marine advanced from the flank, its chain axe swinging in a wide, deadly arc. Doomguy sidestepped with lightning reflexes, delivering a crushing uppercut that sent the Marine staggering, while Kratos pivoted mid-leap, blades of chaos striking in a synchronized motion that severed the enemy's arm and punctured its chest. The synergy was seamless. Doomguy drew fire and created openings. Kratos exploited them with precision, and together they carved through the enemy lines as though the chaos forces were mere obstacles in a controlled training exercise. From the shadows of a collapsed building, Daemon spawn began to emerge, their forms grotesque and shifting, each movement unnatural and jerky. Doomguy did not hesitate, switching to his chainsaw and revving it to life, tearing through the lesser daemons with a mechanical roar that drowned out their shrieks. Kratos followed, blades spinning, striking with arcs of fire and steel that incinerated and dismembered with equal efficiency. The battlefield became a blur of motion, each strike a calculated act of destruction, each movement a demonstration of their lethal partnership. Amid the chaos, Doomguy noticed a squad of Chaos Marines attempting to flank them from the rear. He barked a wordless command, leaping forward and firing with perfect timing, his shotgun tearing through the flank before they could fully execute their maneuver. Kratos spun on a dime, blade striking downward on a daemon attempting to emerge from the rubble above, preventing a potential ambush from collapsing their assault. Every attack, every dodge, and every strategic move was executed with a harmony born of experience, instinct, and mutual understanding forged in countless previous battles. The Chaos Forces regrouped, attempting to leverage superior numbers and their corrupted tactics. They summoned warp energy, hurling bolts of fire and shadow toward Doomguy and Kratos, hoping to disrupt their rhythm. Doomguy ducked under a blast, firing a grenade into the enemy cluster, the explosion creating a wave of debris that momentarily neutralized their advantage. Kratos, sensing the subtle shift in the battlefield's energy, hurled his blades with impeccable timing, slicing through armor and sinew, creating a corridor for them to advance while minimizing exposure to further attacks. As the battle pressed on, the two warriors began to exploit the urban environment itself. Crumbling buildings became strategic vantage points, rubble was used to funnel enemies into kill zones, and fires from overturned vehicles illuminated weak points in the Chaos Forces formations. Doomguy's tactical acumen allowed him to manipulate the battlefield with ruthless efficiency, while Kratos' raw power and precision ensured that every opening was exploited to its maximum potential. Together, they became an unstoppable force, blending strategy and ferocity in a way that even the hardened Chaos Marines could not anticipate. The tide began to turn as the Chaos Forces faltered under the relentless assault. Doomguy's unyielding aggression drew fire and attention, while Kratos' precise strikes dismantled the enemy's formation piece by piece. Daemon spawn fell in heaps, space marines were cleaved in two, and the ground itself seemed to tremble under the sheer force of their combined assault. Even the surviving Chaos leaders, Those who had commanded fear and respect among their troops found themselves overwhelmed, struggling to maintain control as Doomguy methodically dismantled every layer of resistance. Amid the debris and smoke, the two warriors pressed onward, each step calculated, each strike deliberate, their synergy now a palpable force on the battlefield. Doomguy's unyielding firepower and Kratos' devastating melee attacks combined to create a vortex of destruction, leaving a path of ruin and shattered foes in their wake. The Hive City's defenders, those who had survived the initial waves of chaos, could only watch in awe as these two forces of nature carved a path through what had seemed an unstoppable enemy. Each movement, each kill, and each tactical maneuver reinforced the unspoken bond between them, a partnership that had transformed a desperate struggle into a controlled, unstoppable offensive.
The city had become a nightmare, a twisted labyrinth of fire, rubble, and the shrieks of the damned. Yet Doomguy and Kratos pressed forward without hesitation. Every step they took was measured, calculated, and yet instinctive, honed by countless battles against foes that would have broken lesser warriors. Doomguy's armor, scarred and battered from previous encounters, gleamed faintly beneath the sickly light of burning buildings, his weapons at the ready, fingers twitching with the familiar anticipation of violence. Kratos moved beside him with an almost predatory grace, blades of chaos coiled and ready, his eyes scanning for threats while his muscles tensed like drawn steel. The city seemed to pulse around them, the corruption of chaos radiating in waves that twisted the air and distorted perception. Yet they were undeterred, a force of raw will and skill navigating a battlefield few could survive. They advanced into the central plaza, a once grand meeting ground now reduced to a field of shattered stone and twisted steel. From the shadows of the surrounding ruins, demons began to emerge, their forms grotesque and unnatural, some slithering on multiple limbs, others towering with jagged armor and burning eyes. Doomguy reacted instantly, shotgun roaring as blasts tore through the nearest creatures, chunks of demonic flesh scattering across the debris-strewn ground. Kratos moved in perfect synchronization, leaping over the wreckage and striking with blades of chaos that whirled in arcs of fire and steel, cleaving limbs and dismembering foes before they could even fully manifest. The air was thick with the scent of blood, ozone, and smoke, a chaos of sensory overload that neither warrior allowed to distract them. The first wave of Chaos Space Marines advanced from the eastern flank, their bolters spitting rounds that tore through the air with lethal precision. Doomguy calculated their movements, ducking and weaving while firing rapid volleys that tore into the enemy lines. Each shot was deliberate, exploiting gaps in armor and anticipating recoil patterns, the controlled violence a testament to his years of experience. Kratos, leaping onto a collapsed wall, spun his blades with deadly finesse, striking at the weak points Doomguy exposed, tearing through corrupted armor and severing limbs with brutal efficiency. Together they moved as one entity, a blend of tactical intelligence and raw power that left even the seasoned Chaos Marines reeling. A massive demon, the size of a small building, surged from the western edge of the plaza, its claws scraping the stone and shaking the ground with every step. Its roar echoed, a sound of pure malice that seemed to warp the air itself. Doomguy fired a missile, the explosion detonating against the demon's flank, yet the creature barely faltered. Kratos adjusted mid-leap, chains lashing in precise arcs to sever tendrils and crush armored plates, each strike timed to maximize damage while avoiding the creature's retaliatory blows. The battle became a dance of destruction, each movement of Doomguy drawing attention and opening vulnerabilities, each strike of Kratos exploiting those openings with deadly precision. Around them, the city itself seemed to respond. Collapsing buildings and debris were leveraged as cover and weaponry. Fire erupted from overturned vehicles, creating choke points that funneled enemies into kill zones.
Doomguy's strategic mind began to dominate the battlefield, orchestrating the chaos with controlled aggression. Each grenade, each blast, each movement calculated to shape the terrain to their advantage. Kratos complemented this perfectly, his understanding of combat flow allowing him to anticipate enemy reactions and strike decisively at critical moments, ensuring that no opportunity for advantage was wasted. The Chaos forces, sensing their advantage slipping, attempted to regroup. Bolter fire and warp energy surged in a combined assault, aiming to overwhelm the duo through sheer numbers and raw power. Doomguy rolled through the onslaught, firing systematically, grenades and explosive charges tearing gaps in the enemy lines. Kratos vaulted over debris and spinning strikes, his blades slicing through armor and sinew, each movement fluid and lethal. The synergy between them became almost instinctual. Doomguy would create the openings, draw fire and control movement, while Kratos exploited every weakness, delivering devastating blows that dismantled the enemy's formation piece by piece. Amidst the carnage, they noticed a squad of Chaos sorcerers attempting to summon reinforcements from the warp. Doomguy moved with precise efficiency, launching explosives to disrupt their concentration and break the magical constructs forming around them. Kratos seized the opportunity, leaping high and striking downward, blades of chaos cleaving through armor and arcane wards alike, cutting off the heads of the sorcerers before they could complete the ritual. The warp itself seemed to tremble at their audacity, its corruption challenged by the combination of relentless aggression and godlike precision. As they advanced further into the plaza, the remaining Chaos forces regrouped into tighter formations, desperate to leverage their superior numbers. Doomguy's firepower continued to dominate, each blast calculated to disrupt and isolate enemy groups, while Kratos' blades tore through armor and sinew, creating corridors of destruction that allowed them to control the flow of battle. The two warriors operated in perfect harmony, each aware of the other's position, the trajectory of every attack, the timing required to exploit openings. Even the surrounding terrain became an extension of their strategy, debris and flames manipulated to create tactical advantages and funnel enemies into unavoidable deaths. Despite the overwhelming odds, Doomguy and Kratos pressed on, their momentum unrelenting. Every swing, every shot, every movement was executed with precision and deadly intent. The Chaos forces, formidable and numerous, began to falter under the relentless assault, their formation shattered, morale broken, and strength drained. The plaza, once a symbol of civilization, now stood as a testament to their combined power, a field of destruction shaped by strategy, skill, and unyielding ferocity.